Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. Welcome to another Age of Empires vs. History video. This time we'll be looking at the historical inspiration and accuracy of the bonuses, tech tree, and unique unit of the Celts. I've been looking forward to this one because Celts are considered one of the least accurately represented, which for a series like this, I take as a challenge. Let's check them out. To start things off, who are the Celts? Somewhat confusingly, the term can be applied to different areas depending on the time period we're talking about. The first is a loose term for the Indo-European culture that dominated Central to Western Europe during the Iron Age. This included the Celts that Julius Caesar fought in Gaul, who the Romans thought were very strange for wearing pants of all things. Now this wasn't a Celtic empire, it was more of a cultural label than a political one, as the Iron Age peoples in modern-day Spain, Ireland, and Switzerland would probably have all found each other quite alien, with far more differences than similarities. In the medieval period and later, we have what are called the Celtic nations, where elements of Celtic culture and languages survive as Gaelic, Cornish, Welsh, and Breton. Due to the passage of time and Christianization, this is a very different culture than the Celts described by Caesar and other Romans. In Age of Empires 2, they seem to take elements from both conceptions of Celts, though with the most inspiration drawn from the Gaels in Scotland and Ireland during the late Middle Ages, with a special interest in William Wallace. Before getting to that though, let's start with their anachronistic unique unit, the Woad Raider. Contrary to what Mel Gibson would have us believe, nobody in Ireland or Scotland was wearing war paint by the High Middle Ages. When Julius Caesar launched his second invasion of Britain in 54 BC, he noted that one of the many curious practices of the locals was to dye their bodies blue using the woad plant. The striped trousers also fit Greco-Roman depictions of the Celts. Basically, there's nothing medieval in terms of the unit's appearance. Of course, it's still how Celts are sometimes depicted in movies, so I understand the choice, but we are off to a bit of a shaky start here from a historical accuracy perspective. I think part of that decision was that they very consciously wanted Celts to be a fast and light infantry civilization, in contrast to the Britons' archers, Franks' heavy cavalry, and the Teutons' slower but heavily armored motif. To complement that, you also have the Celts' faster moving infantry bonus, which is probably a nod to the raiding done by Irish warbands, Scottish Highlanders, and the Reaver families of the Anglo-Scottish border. It was common for all of these groups to attack using the element of surprise to steal as much livestock and portable wealth as they could carry. The Irish in particular were relatively late to adopt a monetary economy, and instead wealth was based on how many cattle you had. If you could steal a rival's livestock, then even better. Not only does that tie in with fast-moving infantry that can raid and then escape quickly, but it's also the likely inspiration for their sheep stealing bonus, allowing them to convert nearby sheep even if it's within an enemy's line of sight. In fact, early on in the game's development, there was intended to be a class of raider civilizations, which included Celts alongside Mongols and Vikings. The plan was for them to have a totally different playstyle, able to steal enemy villagers and not having to advance through ages. Even though they ended up not implementing that game mechanic, elements of that aggressive raiding playstyle are still present in their bonuses. All that's to say, the guerrilla warfare style of a group of fast-moving militia that occasionally steal your livestock is rooted in some history. And if their unique unit was switched with something more medieval, like a gallowglass, then we'd have a fairly accurate civilization so far. Moving on from infantry, the other type of unit the Celts in Age of Empires specialize in is siege. With a nearly full tech tree, better firing rate, more HP, and faster working siege workshops, they're one of the strongest, if not the strongest siege civilization in the game. So what's the justification for that? Well, they don't give a lot of insight into their thinking here. Their unique tech for more HP is called Furor Celtica, and I'm not sure what being angry has to do with extra siege HP. Putting aside the odd naming choice, there is justification for at least being above average if we look to Scotland, who were no strangers to sieging castles. Stirling and Edinburgh castles, for example, have been under siege at least a combined 15 times, as they changed hands between the kingdoms of Scotland and England. James II in particular greatly expanded the Scottish arsenal with new gunpowder weapons, including a large number of imported cannons. Unfortunately, his passion for artillery would be his downfall. James II was famously killed by one of his own cannons during the siege of Roxburgh Castle in 1460. This is even referenced in the history section about gunpowder, probably not what he wanted to be remembered by. A small wrinkle here though is Celts don't have bombard cannon, which at first seems like an oversight if Scottish cannons are the best justification for Celts having strong siege, but you can really see the developers' bind. If they did, it would lead to the late game army composition of bombard cannons and Woad raiders fighting side by side, when in reality they would have been separated by hundreds of years. I get the feeling there really wasn't a perfect solution after they decided to capture such completely different time periods into one civ. What we get are Celts with siege and infantry in a way that's at least internally consistent as a mostly pre-gunpowder civilization. That's not to say they always favor a pre-medieval interpretation of the Celts though. For example, when it comes to their cavalry, the Celts proper, that is, people who called themselves Celts and were called as such by the Greeks and Romans, were renowned for their cavalry and incorporated into the Roman army as auxilia. On the other hand, neither the medieval Scots nor Irish were particularly renowned for their heavy cavalry, at least in the Middle Ages. The developers ended up taking them in that direction and withholding bloodlines. The result is a relatively weak Night Rush and the feeling that we're back to a more medieval interpretation. While that might seem at odds with giving them access to the Paladin, that's probably a reference to Scottish kings who by some accounts requested the loan of French knights to bolster their armies. Given their lack of bloodlines in the final armor upgrade, I think this is more of a mercenary situation, and a unit that Celts weren't intended to make use of as often as infantry and siege. I think a mercenary explanation is also the best argument for why they have heavy cavalry archer as well. It's missing just about every important upgrade and is more of a nomadic steppe unit than one would picture being at home in Scotland. There were some early medieval chronicles promoting the idea that the Scythians traveled to northern Britain via the Baltic and gave rise to the Picts, though no one seriously believes that claim today. Scythians, of course, were very well known for their cavalry archers. Regardless of the justification or if it's included as a joke, I can't remember the last time I saw someone make cavalry archers as Celts, and it's probably created more often by misclicking than anything else. The archer line is interesting though. There's some evidence that the Picts were early adopters or independent inventors of the crossbow, at least for use when hunting. You would think they might have good crossbows then, but I think from day one, Celts were always going to be given weak archers, missing arbalest, thumb ring, and the last armor upgrade, simply to contrast them with the Britons. It's not that they didn't use bows and crossbows, but were just overshadowed in the history of archery by the English. Some of the Scots' worst defeats were due to the effectiveness of Welsh and English longbowmen. The Battle of Falkirk is a great example where Scottish pikemen went into a defensive formation, but were picked off by longbowmen until there were enough holes in the Scottish ranks for cavalry to charge. The Scottish and Irish also traditionally played second fiddle to the English navy, though in Age of Empires they're actually a reasonably good naval civilization until the late game, when they're missing Bracer. Even then they have texts like Shipwright and Drydock, suggesting it's supposed to be a good navy. That might be a reference to the Kingdom of the Isles, which was a powerful fiefdom that emerged in the Western Isles of Scotland and the Isle of Man, as a result of intermixing of the local Gaelic population and Norse settlers during the Viking period. Their Gallowglass warriors were sufficiently powerful that it wasn't until the 15th century that the Lords of the Isles were brought under the rule of the King of Scots. There is in fact a Lord of the Isles to this day, and currently it's Prince Charles. Really, what makes their navy so strong though in Age of Empires is their faster lumberjacks. It's also their main economy bonus, so you'd think there would be a great historical connection there. In reality though, the Scots were actually more renowned as stonemasons than lumberjacks. All I can attribute this to is the fact that every good lumberjack wears a lot of what's commonly called plaid in North America, with a pattern that traces its roots back to the Scottish tartan. Depending on local dyes that were available, clans from different regions would have different colored tartan, identifying the region and sometimes the clan that someone was from. Admittedly, I might be reaching a bit on that one. Another more obvious connection to the Celts is their Castle Age unique tech, Stronghold, giving their castles a faster firing rate. Both Ireland and Scotland have a large number of castles, reflecting the border tensions with England throughout the Middle Ages, as well as internal wars between the Scottish king and families like the Clan Douglas. Wrapping up with a few specific cultural references, the Learning Campaign of course features William Wallace, one of the main leaders during the First War of Scottish Independence. His victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge is depicted in the 5th mission, albeit without a bridge present in the original game. In Definitive Edition now, there is a bridge, so I guess that was a common enough complaint. Historically, it was a Scottish victory over a larger English army that was thanks to a surprise attack while the English were in the middle of crossing it. Slightly less realistic is the Battle of Falkirk, which the campaign depicts as another Scottish victory, whereas in reality, as I mentioned earlier, it was a Scottish defeat. Wallace escaped the battle but resigned as Guardian of Scotland and was later captured and executed. I see why they thought it wasn't a great tone to end the campaign on, and in fact, I think it's okay in a campaign to have an alternate ending, all thanks to the heroic actions of the player. It makes history feel alive and like something that's not completely set in stone. Still, I have to wonder how many people lost marks on a high school history test because of playing that campaign. Something else I haven't touched on in the series yet is the language spoken by the units. The Age of Empires wiki has done a great job tracking down the actual translations and identified them as Middle Irish. I think it's pretty cool the developers went to the trouble of looking for people who could give the Middle Irish words that match the villagers' actions. It's one of those details they really didn't have to include, but obviously wanted to get the history right wherever possible. Definitive Edition also added icons to identify each civilization, and the Celt symbol is the triskelion. The symbol has been used and associated with Celtic culture since at least as far back as 350 BC. The green color suggests an Irish influence, and so does their wonder, the Rock of Cashel. According to legend, it was built on the site that St. Patrick converted the King of Munster to Christianity in the 5th century. Originally, it was a castle, but later expanded and given to the church to use as a cathedral. So that's the Celts in Age of Empires 2 and how they compare to history. Special thanks to Dr. Andrew Lamb, who's an archaeologist and expert in Celtic history, for helping a ton with the research for this video. He reached out and answered all of the questions I had, and this video is much better as a result of his input. That's all for this one though. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.